Welcome to We the People's News. News for the people, by the people. Now, we're going to see today that freedom of speech and freedom of religion is under attack in America, and people are paying the price for their beliefs and their right to free speech. There's no other way to look at this. This is a tragedy in America.
Teacher Peter Vlamming is fired from West Point Public Schools. The public hearing inside these doors lasted 4 hours, and the school board met privately for 1 hour before making that final decision. West Point High School French teacher Peter Vlamming is now out of a job. All 5 school board members followed the superintendent's recommendation that Vlamming be terminated.
Freedom of religion means the Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Compelling someone to call something because they believe they are something, and that's how they feel, is infringing on the free exercise of this man's beliefs. It is forced upon him. It isn't a choice, so thus it's not freedom, all wrapped up in the don't discriminate, oh you bigot, rapping.
Out of West Point, Virginia, that's where a teacher who refused to recognize a transgender student has been fired.
Now, parents, have you been told about this new social justice laws in our schools that govern your children, that directive saying you have to call someone by the gender they choose, whatever that means? They're born a boy or a girl, and that's just the way we should keep it professional. What they feel shouldn't matter. All right, that's a made up thing. That's not a factual thing. It's how they feel. So it could be anything day to day. I mean, what are we supposed to ask every day? But anyway, I regress a little. This teacher called them by their first name to avoid this directive that is in all of our schools. They have overtaken our schools with social justice warrior propaganda, and they didn't even tell you.
Brendan King has been following the story for us all evening. Brendan, what can you tell us about the situation?
Yeah, it was a long hearing, I can tell you that. Tonight's hearing was an inside look into a personnel matter that's most often behind closed doors, but the teacher, in danger of losing his income, asked for this public hearing. Hours later, he received an outcome that he pretty much dreaded.
Now, did you catch that? Usually these are done behind closed doors, so we never find out about it, because the media, see how they portray it. He refused to do something, not it may be an unjust request. They show their hand real easy. This is how they do it.
And even higher than my family ranks my faith.
Like reading a sermon out of the good book.
I hope you perceive the absurdity of this.
Look how they make light about always reading a sermon out of the good book. No, he's fighting for his job and his beliefs. And that's what every American should be behind this man, standing up for his rights, just like we stand up for identity gender rights. Really?
Today because a specific worldview is being imposed upon me.
The proceedings Thursday were a trial of sorts, absent of a courtroom, including a swearing in of witnesses like the teacher in question, Peter Vlamming.
And during this eighth period in mid-October, I had 4 or 5 students in my classroom.
The school board says Vlamming violated their non-discrimination and harassment policies.
How about their policy break is unconstitutional? How about that? That's a terrible policy to have. And it's forced upon you. See, his belief doesn't matter. It's what the collective thinks.
When he refused to call a rising 9th grade transgender student who identifies as a male as he and him.
First off, what is a rising transgender 9th grade student? I don't understand that. Did they have an erection? I'm sorry, that's just bad humor. But anyway, he didn't refuse to call the man or woman, whatever she wanted to be called. No, what he did is he chose to call the person from their mother's name, the name the mother gave them, to avoid this nonsense, what he considers nonsense, which most common people consider, which most, I believe, Americans believe is nonsense. And it's letting children dictate to adults is what it's doing. It's creating chaos in our schools. Yes, it is. It has no place in our schools. Absolutely none. Its political agenda is social justice. It's a political agenda, socialism. That's what this is. That's how they squeezing it in. But anyway, what you'll find out what he did was an accident, and how that created a hostile environment. Yeah. Pay attention. They tell you if you just know how to pay attention. He created a hostile environment because he accidentally called her her. That's coming.
Telling the principal back in October,
I've had a slip up, and he went on to describe what had happened. He goes, the student was participating in an activity, almost walked into a wall, and I yelled out, "Stop her."
See, now this is just amazingly stupid. He's trying to help her and save her, him, whatever. You see, it gets confusing. How do you know? How do you not tell a story? I had a guy in a bar. I was talking about standing up for my freedom, for my rights, is what I was doing. And and a guy jumped a few bar stools away, jumped up and got in my face, and there was I guess you call him lesbian. She looked like a truck driver. She wanted to be a man. She was gay. She was the starter of it all somehow, and I don't even know what I said wrong, but he's in my face all of a sudden telling me I need to shut the F up. So I invited him outside to tell me that. And of course, he wouldn't go. And the lesbian got between us, put her hand on me. Now, I wondered in my mind, this confusion. She wants to be a man. She identifies as a man. She put her hands on me like a man. If I hit her, what am I to the judge? Did I hit a woman or did I hit a man? See, they haven't thought this through. That was just a logical thing that's happened to me in my lifetime that didn't make no sense. And that's the thoughts that went through my head.
And by failing to follow the directive, he was therefore discriminating and therefore creating a hostile environment.
He called her, or him, her, however you want to look at it, to help try to save her from going into a wall. Some of that's a hostile environment. How can words really bring you to a hostile environment? Our Supreme Court's looked at this issue. They said there's no such thing as hate speech. It's all free speech. You're free not to listen to it too, but you're not free to dictate to others how they have to speak. That's the problem here. The school is dictating an American citizen and how he has to speak because of how a ninth grader thinks she feels, or he feels, or it feels, I guess, is the best term for me. Because I'll never cave into this. Unproven science. Research it.
As this is about free speech, but A.W. Pete is also a professor at the University of Toronto who says that Peterson's language is abusive. Joining us right now is Professor Jordan Peterson, as well as Professor A.W. Pete. Thank you for joining us today.
Let's bring in an expert on free speech and one of the best thinkers of our time, Dr. Jordan Peterson. And if you don't know who he is, be prepared to be impressed. He is a professor. It was in Toronto, Canada. They passed a law there. You have to call transgenders, and he refused to do it. He's in the midst of them. He is a brilliant man, and look how he defends free speech. And watch how he just tears apart every argument from the other side. This transgender professor from the same university, and watch. The guy says he always tells the truth, but watch how Dr. Peterson picks apart his so-called truth, and you can see that it's all emotion to him, how people feel. It's all about the feel, and this is just amazing stuff.
Thanks.
Professor Peterson, let's begin with you. Why are you against the use of alternate pronouns?
I'm against the use of legislation to determine what words that myself and other people are required to utter.
See, right away, the media tries to paint that man as against something, against people, discriminatory, when in reality they're putting words in his mouth, which you will explain and explain better than I can. That's for sure. This is one of the men I listen to, is one of my influences for writing.
But would you use alternate pronouns if a student asked you to?
I think I've made my position on that clear already.
Well, perhaps not to our audience at home who are just being introduced to this. Would you use alternate pronouns? And why not?
Because I don't believe that other people have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation.
Yes, punitive legislation. What is that? That is punishing a person. for not speaking a certain way. That is nowhere near freedom of speech, which is fundamental, as you'll see, to freedom. You can't have one without the other. And that's the rub in all this. This is the neat little way they are trying to paint people that love freedom as bigots because they're against gender identity. They already label Christian churches that are against, and the reason why in the Southern Poverty Law Center, they're against homosexuality or the LGBT movement, that is considered hate to them. And 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 you and they will say words are like violence. It's just amazing, or a hostile environment. It's absolutely amazing.
And when the words that are being required are the constructions, they're artificial constructions of people I regard as radical ideologues whose viewpoint I do not share.
That's what's amazing about it all. Now, here in America, we have a thing called the First Amendment. Canada, they don't have real free speech. Nowhere else has this First Amendment to anywhere else in the world anymore. If you don't think there's a war on free speech and this is the tool, you're not paying attention, because it is a dying thing in the world. Blasphemy laws are also springing up. And guess who goes to jail for them?
Well, we have a graphic to show our audience at home, just some of the pronouns being used or asked to be used as alternates. Among them you see here Z or Zim, Z or here, Z or Zir, also hey, or A rather, and per. So just some of the alternate pronouns there. Professor Pete, when you hear Professor Peterson saying that this is oppressive, how do you respond to that?
The Peterson drama has done real harm to real people on campus.
This professor would have you believe that standing up for your right to free speech does real harm to real people. What harm has he done? Does he give an example? No, he just spews it, but yet later he says he doesn't lie. This is all perceived harm, a perceived oppression. It's just unbelievable. Unbelievable.
It's made it harder to be transgender or non-binary. I know this from personal experience. I'm non-binary and transgender, and I know how it's felt to be on the U of T campus for the last month.
Now notice what he says. I know how it felt. He made it harder for people to be what? I thought they were born that way. So how can it be harder for them to be that way if they're born that way? Aren't they just that way then? That's confusing to me.
And I also know from private communications with other affected people. In New Zealand, where I grew up, academics have a statutory role enshrined in the Education Act to be a critic and conscience of society. So I think that's an idea worth exporting to Canada. So I'd like to give Peterson about a B+ for his critic role recently, and an F for the conscience part.
First off, he's a colleague, not a student to be grading. He's not asking for your grading. That's you putting yourself in the higher moral ground, which you don't have. And he will soon put you in your place for that. It's all about emotion, how people feel. Is that how we judge society? Is controlling what someone else says because it offends you? Is that how we control society? I'm from the sticks and stones will break our bones generation. Words will never hurt us unless we let them hurt us. I mean, what is this? What is the world coming to? It's just a travesty of freedom.
A student once said to me when I finally obtained tenure, "Now, Professor, now that you have obtained superpowers, you must agree to use them for good."
If you think attacking free speech is good, but it's okay for you to how you feel, you compel someone else to call you that, and you compare it to names later, which is apples and oranges. But this is just absolutely amazing stuff and goes right in line with what's happening right here in America. That's why I'm showing you the two different countries and what's going on.
For peace and justice. So I invite Peterson to start doing more of that.
Well, Professor Peterson, those who are asking for this alternate use of alternate pronouns, they are saying it boils down to respecting their human rights. How do you respond to that?
I don't think it boils down to respecting their human rights. I think that it's an imposition on freedom of speech that's being implemented at a legislative level. I also think that if there was a naturally evolving solution to the linguistic problem that's being posed by a small fraction of the transgender community, that people would have already adopted it. We've never had a situation in the usage of English before that required legislation to produce a transformation in the manner in which people spoke. It's a very dangerous precedent. So it's one thing to tell people what they can't say. So, for example, we have legislation making it illegal to do such things as deny the Holocaust. It's a completely different thing to demand that people use certain words when they're formulating their own ideas. And I mean, it's also absurd. I mean, here's one thing that's happened that I don't believe the formulators of this legislation ever foresaw. So in New York City, for example, there are now 31 protected gender identities. And I see no reason whatsoever why each of those gender identities can't demand the use of their own pronoun. And that absurd things like that have been happening on the University of Michigan campus, for example, where students have been given permission to tell faculty members and others what pronouns they're to be addressed by, and they're multiplying rapidly out of control.
See, therein lies the rub. If it's going to be a never ending, there's no definition. I watched another good Canadian, Stephen Crowder, talk about this. There's 31 now, and they keep evolving. How each one's going to need a legal status. They haven't thought this through very well. And it's just creating, so what we got to ask, but if it changes, it's how you feel. So one day you could feel one way, another day you could feel another way, right? It's never ending. It's designed to destroy freedom of speech, not only in Canada, but also here in America, as you see what this all started about, and we will get back to the teacher being fired because he refused this. It's right in your backyard, in your schools. You see, he mentions two universities, or New York and Michigan University, and it's right in your local schools also.
So the law is bad from an ethical perspective. It's sloppily written. And besides that, the solution that it imposes is practically untenable.
Well, sorry, excuse me for jumping in, but I want to bring in Professor Pete here because we did show those words to our audience at home, and perhaps the control room can show it to our audience once again. When you look at those alternate pronouns, I think it's fair to say that some people will see that at home and see that as very unwieldy, if you will. What do you say to those types of criticisms, including the one you just heard from Professor Peterson?
Well, I'd like to encourage people struggling with this to be kind as their first impulse. You know, we call somebody what they want to be called in our society. For instance, I don't call somebody Julie if they prefer to be called Jordan.
One of the big differences is that's the name the mother gave them, and there's always nicknames and stuff, but there's not a law compelling you to. See, there's a law now in Canada compelling you to call people how they feel, not their name, or a name is not about how you feel, it's the name your mother gave you. Some people shorten it, long it, whatever it's not the same.
That's just basic human courtesy. Here's a great little tip for people who are despairing at the possibility of remembering all those pronouns. What I do is just program in the pronoun next to the person's name in my smartphone.
Now it's a call to action. Now I have to do an action because of this law, if I want to remember, because there's so many, there's 31 of them, I can't keep them straight. And I mean, I don't have one of them photographic memories. And it's so foreign that just he and her, a teacher got mixed up. That created a hostile environment, and he got fired, and he was just trying to help her. Imagine that. This is the garbage they spew.
So whenever I'm out and about and I've forgotten whether one of my trans friends uses ze or zer or they or them or something else, I just look it up and it's really super easy. One thing I'd like you to really look at in regard to this controversy is to watch out for who's getting centered in a discussion. Political correctness is code that powerful people use when they're annoyed that they're actually not the center of attention in any given discussion.
I believe we call that projection. What the professor's doing right there.
And Bill C-16 is actually not about cisgender people. It's about protections for transgender people. And that's not, it's not about Jordan Peterson. So, we should have people learning to listen more. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a very good reason. When things get political, I like to ask who benefits and who gets to decide the rules of the game.
Now, did you catch that? He just admitted this was political. I thought it was about kindness and courtesy, but it's actually political. And see, that political ideology is in our schools getting people fired. That's what I want you guys to understand what social justice is. It's a political ideology. That's what it is. And it's being forced upon us in America also, right under our noses because we don't pay attention. They admit it if you listen to him. He's right. You got one mouth and two ears. And I listen to him and I hear him loud and clear with my ears. Maybe he ought to take his own advice.
So, mostly with this Peterson controversy, which is really just a small drama, a tempest in a teapot.
So you won't see Dr. Jordan Peterson on CNN because they can't handle him. He's too big now. Just blew him up. Huge. This guy, tempest in a teapot. Hey, do you sense a little bit of jealousy? Maybe that's what that kind of amounts to. Because Dr. Jordan Peterson, been all over, and no media that's ever let him on has bested him with their liberal arguments because they can't. The man is considered one of the best minds in our time.
He could just get over learning to program a few pronouns into his phone. By the way, I only have half a dozen or so that I actually use on an everyday basis, so it's not all that difficult.
Professor Peterson, sorry, Professor Peterson, I'm going to jump in because I think Professor Peterson wants to get in on that.
Yeah, well, kindness is the excuse that social justice warriors use when they want to exercise control over what other people think and say.
This is what it boils down to, emotional politics. Oh, you're separating families. No, they came here illegally. Their parents brought them. They knew what they were doing was wrong. They were organized by groups called that translated as open borders. They separated them from their families. They did it by their actions. But instead, you don't look at their actions. It's us being cruel. It's you're a bigot. If you're against it, you're a racist. Blah, blah, blah. It's all emotional politics. And it's sickening.
So, if we're bandying back and forth our differences in values, I would say that the highest possible value is truth, and that one of the concomitants is that we need stringent protection for freedom of speech so that we can utter the truths that we see fit.
The truth, God forbid. That's what it's all about. And that's why he wants Peterson to be looked at as a little blip in history and nothing, and because he speaks the truth that this man doesn't want to hear, so they create laws to stop us from speaking the truth and having free speech.
And I think that that's a value that's much higher than kindness, for example. I mean, there's lots of situations in life where kindness in the immediate present is not the appropriate way to react at all.
But
so, for example, when you discipline children, you often hurt their feelings in the short term so that they can learn to behave properly in the medium to long term so that their lives go well. And so this automatic assumption that the people on the social justice warrior side of the equation are motivated only by kindness when they're also clearly motivated by power is something I find completely untenable. And I don't think that Pete's solution to program my cell phone so that I can remember what names people need to be called is a reasonable solution at all. We're actually supposed to now use electronic devices to bolster our ability to speak freely in case we offend someone?
Is it so difficult to remember a pronoun? You remember somebody's first name, you remember their telephone number. I mean, I think that it's
I don't
very,
remember
very
people's
true
first names very easily, and I don't remember their telephone numbers very easily. And when I see a stranger, I call them by the pronoun that seems to be in accordance with their presented appearance. And
that's you
they
being
appear
lazy,
that way.
Jordan. That's you being lazy. I think.
Let's see, the emotional plea didn't work. The conscience one, and now you got the personal attack. Man, it's liberal 101. It's just amazing. Oh, you're lazy, Jordan. No, he is being forced. What you're saying is he's not lazy if he doesn't want to do what you're forcing him to do. That's absolutely amazing. I don't know how one of these professors is a professor.
There's a very high value that we should also be aiming for in addition to truth. By the way, throughout this whole controversy, I have told the truth at every turn. So, trying to imply that that's not what's happening on people on the social justice, am I a social justice warrior? I don't know. But I think that we should be aiming for pluralism. This means recognizing more than one set of fundamental principles, fostering independent cultural traditions of minorities, and being willing to share power with people who are different than you.
Oh, here comes the political ideology. See, I thought it was about kindness. I thought it was about courtesy. No, it's not. It's about power. That's what it's about. And having norms in society is how it's always been and always will be. And we don't judge our society by the outliers, the very small percentages. They say there's 1.4%, 1.4 million transgenders in America. So you divide that by 300 million, you get 0.00046%. They are the ones that govern our laws because you can't criticize them. See, and those you can't criticize are those that rule over you. It's just that simple. And it's not bigoted. It's the norms of society that you're not conforming to.
I think if you just stop centering this whole controversy on yourself and how hard it is for you to accommodate genderqueer people, well, have a little bit of sympathy. I mean, those of us who are trans encounter much more greater indignities every day and every week of the month. For example, have you recently had a bank employee accuse you of trying to masquerade as yourself at a bank and then...
What does masquerading as yourself even mean? What? This guy, the desperation of losing an argument. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Locking down your ATM card and credit card so that you can't use any money? Those are the sorts of problems that trans people face every day, being out of housing, being considered, considering suicide. These are really big problems.
My refusal to use pronouns because left-wing activists want me to use them has nothing to do with whether or not trans people are having difficulties in society. And I'd also like to point out that I've had many letters of support.
Isn't it?
I've had many letters of support from trans people, and they tell me that the trans activists don't support them.
Now watch a series of lies and how he tries to belittle what Dr. Peterson is saying. This is just amazing. Look at this. It's like a little, a little sissy fit. I don't know if that's the term. Probably not politically correct, but oh well, it's my show.
And most trans people
Jordan,
actually wanted to be referred to as he or she.
Doesn't mean
they
that
weren't
you
my
are
friends.
Untransphobic.
They
just
weren't
because
my
you
friends.
know a few people, just because you've talked to a few trans people, you don't know the trans community like the trans community does. You've got no idea what it's like to be trans.
See the worn out argument, just because you have a couple black friends doesn't mean you're not racist. I mean, and that's not even what Jordan Peterson, he got letters, they were strangers. Obviously, this guy, didn't he say to listen with 2 ears and you get 2 ears and 1 mouth? Well, obviously he doesn't take his own advice. He's full of himself, not Dr. Peterson. He's worried about others' free speech rights. This man's worried about himself and only his little group. And that is division. And this is not American culture. That's for sure.
Professor Pete, I'm sorry to interrupt. Let's let Professor Peterson finish his thought, please.
All right. So the trans activists aren't proper representatives of the trans community because they haven't been elected by the trans community.
Nobody elected you either, Jordan.
I'm not speaking for anyone except myself and on behalf of other people perhaps who want to maintain the right to free speech. I'm not claiming that I'm a representative of white people or white men or any other group. I'm speaking on behalf of myself.
Once again, he tries to distort the truth. That's all he can do is try to smear and slander Dr. Peterson now because he's lost the logical arguments and all he has left is the emotional argument, and we can't let that run society.
And so I'm not taking...
But Professor Peterson, let me jump in there, though, because we have seen an evolution of language. There are words that we don't use anymore.
Not by legislation.
Well, legislation or not, there are words that have evolved. We don't use, for example, I'm Asian. I would bristle if someone called me Oriental. That is an evolution of how we use words. How is this different, whether legislated or not?
I understand
legislation.
I mean, once again, here's the newscaster trying to paint it a certain way, trying to sell the agenda, but Dr. Peterson puts him right in his place. And I ask, well, what's wrong with calling someone Oriental? You're from the Orient, right? I mean, that's not a slur. See, this is how it evolved. First is political correctness. We couldn't. It's all about names. It's all about it's all about the attack on freedom of speech, and it's plain and simple. It's easy to recognize.
I understand legislatively, but if at the heart of it is to allow a student to study free of what they feel is discrimination.
Once again, it's how the student feels. Since when did we start legislating by feeling? When did we start compelling people to do things by feeling because someone feels a certain way? This is a ridiculous and dangerous road.
Why not help that along?
I already made my case for why not help that along. I believe that this legislation is extraordinarily dangerous, and there's other elements of it too that we haven't even got to in our society yet, like the protection for gender expression. And I've looked at gender expression in the Ontario Human Rights Code, and as far as I can tell, gender expression is best summarized in a single word: fashion. No. Because it's the way that you present yourself in public with your clothing and your manner of dress. And so I also think that the legislation that we are bringing forth with Bill C-16, and that's already in place in places like Ontario, also makes fashion criticism something akin to a hate crime. And because there's been so much noise about the identity component of this, we haven't even talked about gender expression. This is appalling legislation. And the idea that referring to someone by the pronoun of their choice is going to radically improve their status in society or their mental health is a completely unproven assumption. I think it'll have exactly the opposite effect.
Professor Pete, I want to ask you, because it's been brought up a couple of times, to Professor Peterson's point, if this was so popular, if this was so needed, there would be a natural evolution. There wouldn't be need for legislation. Why the need for legislating this as opposed to allowing it to evolve naturally?
Well, Bill C-16 and the Ontario Human Rights Code do not actually legislate pronoun usage. They don't specify 31 genders or anything of the kind.
Here's that doublespeak. Now remember, he said he's so truthful. We shall see.
But let me jump in, though. The university is essentially telling, at this point, its human resources people to use alternate pronouns, in a way legislating their staff to do this.
In America, we're doing it voluntarily because of federal policy that Barack Hussein Obama put in place. And the schools are doing it because the unions are doing it. It's all a plan to take your free speech away. And it also puts you at odds with your child if you don't believe in it. And the school's telling them, the news telling them, everybody's telling them but you. It puts you at odds with your child. Think about that.
Wait, the legislation the legislation also requires it, and the university made clear their concordance with that that assumption on my part by mentioning in the letter that asked me to silence myself that I'm required to act in accordance with the provisions of the Ontario Human Rights Act. And so the university knows full well that the legislation does precisely what I suggest it does.
Thus, once again, liberal proven wrong. He has no argument, no facts. The problem with arguing with a liberal like him is they believe their opinion, how they feel, is fact, when it is not. So you cannot win the argument with him. But instead they go to personal attacks and things like this, as you all know that have debated with any liberal.
It's not written precisely in Bill C-16. It's written in the Ontario Human Rights Code. And if you read the Ontario Human Rights Commission policies on such things, you'll see very rapidly that utilization of preferred pronouns is part of the legislative package. So
and they're actually, if you read the legislation, Jordan, you will find out that they're actually called correct pronouns. There's no preference about this.
There is on the Ontario.
There
is on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website where the policy is laid out. And if people don't believe that, they can just go look themselves.
Dr. Peterson, how dare you suggest to research something yourself and take a little bit of individual responsibility and accountability? How dare you, Dr. Peterson?
Professor Pete, when you hear that this is a free speech issue, that you hear Professor Peterson in this case essentially saying that he doesn't want to be legislated to adopt new language, what's your response to that?
Well, I share a number of Jordan's concerns about freedom of speech and academic freedom on campus. These are both very, very important principles, and they should apply regardless of what kind of politics you like. For example, if you're a left-winger or a right-winger or an up-winger or a down-winger or whatever it is. But you know, the reason why we have laws that protect academic freedom and freedom of speech is primarily to prevent government interference in individuals' lives, in their business.
First up, if you have laws governing your speech, it is no longer free speech. He is not for free speech. He is for free speech how he feels free speech is, how he wants to compel you to call somebody something. And it's all new, and it's all new theory, and it's not proven. None of it is.
It's there really mostly to protect against a form of structural violence. And these free speech laws were actually never intended to be used as all-purpose accountability shields, you know, so that you don't have to be held accountable for your actions.
This professor thinks it's a free speech law that protects our free speech laws. See the difference? We believe it's a right. And no, you can't make a law to do anything against it. That's a huge fundamental difference.
I'm perfectly willing to be held accountable for my actions, and the university has already indicated the seriousness with which they view my actions. And I also do not believe that free speech laws were there to protect, to regulate violence. Free speech laws are there because we use free speech to identify problems in our society, generate solutions to the problems, and then reach a consensus. So freedom of speech is actually is protection for the mechanism by which our individuals and society properly orient themselves across time.
Free speech is essential to freedom. Don't let the globalists and their army of all these organizations fool you.
It's not even a principle, it's the fundamental method by which our societies manage to maintain the stability that they do maintain. And
it's one of the ways we do that, yes.
Well, I would say that it's the fundamental way. So, and I mean, I think we could have a reasonable discussion about that, but because freedom of speech is so tightly tangled up with the means by which we solve problems. I mean, I think, and then I talk, but I get corrected when I speak publicly. And the fact that I'm being corrected constantly by the people that I'm speaking with helps orient my speech properly and helps orient public discussion properly. And I can tell you, too, that if there wasn't something absolutely vital at stake here that had a lot more to do than with just simple kindness, there wouldn't have been millions of people watching, for example, the assault that took place during the free speech rally that was held a few days after I released the video, which I see that CBC conveniently omitted to include in their video clips at the beginning of this interview.
Why did they do that? To selectively edit out the truth to control your mind. If you don't have all the facts, you can't make a proper sound judgment.
Well, Professor Peterson, we do want to thank you. We're sorry we're out of time here, but I want to thank both of you for joining us today. That is the University of Toronto professors Jordan Peterson.
The teacher's lawyer argues that his client cannot be forced to say something that violates his conscience and his beliefs as a Christian. The public hearing started at 3, and 5 hours later...
All in favor?
Aye.
Now back to West Virginia, United States of America. Freedom of speech is supposed to be a right. Freedom of religion is supposed to be a right. But yet this teacher is paying the price for both. You need to wake up. This isn't even legislated upon in America, and people are. This isn't the only story out there. There's many others if you Google and dig. Is it just one that made the local news?
A unanimous decision. Vlaming was let go.
The fact that I'm being asked to adopt a new ideology on who we are as humans.
I asked the sole provider of his wife and 4 young children, a teacher at West Point for nearly 7 years.
Was this worth it? Was this fight worth it?
There are some hills that are worth dying on.
You're going to see more and more of this because there is a war on Christianity and freedom throughout the world, and it is hitting America. And this is just outrageous that this happened in America. And he is right. The man is right. And they did him wrong. They discriminated against him.
The school system says this was textbook discrimination, treating one student different than another. Meanwhile, Vlaming's picture is already off the school website. He has just 10 days to appeal.
He said the wrong pronoun trying to save her on accident, and usually just called them the names the mothers and fathers gave him, which there's nothing wrong with. This is terrible and sets a terrible precedence.
Candace.
Chairman votes aye. Mr. Jenkins?
Aye.
And with that, a West Point teacher who refused to use a student's preferred pronoun.
Once again, refused. No, it was an accident, and he self-reported himself. And instead of standing behind him for his rights, the school board fires him. But there is hope. Watch how some of his students react.
Students walk out of class today at West Point High School protesting the termination of Peter Vlaming, a French teacher who refuses to use a transgender student's preferred male pronoun. 8 News reporter Sierra Fox broke the story here on Tuesday, and tonight she has exclusive comments from a family friend of that transgender student at the center of the controversy.
Nearly 100 students walked out of class today in support of French teacher Peter Vlaming.
What do we want? Justice! What do we want it now?
Students at West Point High School feel that teacher Peter Vlaming was unfairly disciplined, then fired.
This is political, and it's in our schools, and it was thrown in underneath our noses by a social justice warrior we elected to the White House like fools.
This comes just one day after a public hearing that lasted for hours. Vlaming says he refuses to address a transgender student with male pronouns.
I feel like we really need him back because a lot of people are really upset, and he has 4 kids, so it's kind of hard for him to lose his job right now.
Jamie Pass protests with her daughter. They both disagree with the school board's decision.
With men, women, boy or girl, you believe what you want, but you can't make other people believe what you believe.
Vlaming says his Christian faith prevents him from using male pronouns for a student he sees as female.
We are here today because a specific worldview is being imposed upon me.
He is absolutely 100% correct. It is being imposed upon him. It's compelling him to do something. And it is unconstitutional in the United States of America, plain and simple.
The student and his parents have been advised not to speak at this time. A family friend of the transgender student tells 8 News he seems comfortable in his own skin, as we all would if we could show the world who we really are. He doesn't get to choose to be trans, he's just trans. He's not the first, and he won't be the last. It's time to educate ourselves on the subject and respond with empathy, respect, and curiosity.
Empathy, respect, and curiosity. Because you feel something, this man has to lose his job and can't feed his family? I'll tell you where my empathy is going. And for your curiosity, I'm not curious at all. I know it's unproven science. I know where it comes from, and I know what it's doing. This is just amazing emotional crap. More emotional politics. This is how they try to do it. The news is accomplice in this.
Vlaming says he respects the rights of his student, but he wants his rights to be respected as well. His attorney says they have 10 days to appeal. After that, this case could go to federal court. Reporting in West Point, Sierra Fox, 8 News.
And students at West Point High School stage a walkout today after a teacher is fired for refusing to use a transgender student's new pronouns.
Different channel, same lie that he's refusing to use. Not that this policy has been put into place in our schools without any legislation, because they know they can't do it that way. Instead, they snuck it in social justice. It's throughout, from elementary through our universities, and people need to start taking notice of this Marxist ideology in our schools before it's too late.
Vlaming told school administrators he would not honor a transgender student's request to be referred to as a male with male pronouns, saying it's against his religion.
I feel that everyone should have the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion as well.
Instead, Vlaming tried to resolve the issue by using the student's preferred name and avoid feminine pronouns. The superintendent determined this was an act of insubordination and repeated refusal to comply with directives.
He already had to give in a little bit, but what's wrong calling them by the name the mother and father gave them?
We certainly applaud the board's decision.
But VA Pride President James Milner also believes the issue of how teachers should treat transgender students will continue to be an issue.
Well, there's no statewide guidance on this issue, and that's something that we really need, so that there can be guidance that allows school districts across the state to be able to be well equipped to deal with this issue, because it's not going to go away.
They need to really sit down, and all of them, all the school systems in the state, the country need to sit down and come to a decision.
See, that already happened in 1776, called the Constitutional Convention. I guess maybe the schools should concentrate on teaching maybe history from then and how and what our rights are, instead of making up new ones and pushing them on people and then saying we need laws for them. See, here's the call for legislation to compel you how to speak, to get rid of freedom of speech. This is what it's all about. I hope you learned something because this is fundamental to our way of life. Barack Hussein Obama got up before the American people right after he found out he's elected, 5 days before the inauguration, and he said, "We are 5 days away from fundamentally changing the United States of America." And he meant it, people. He is a social justice warrior. He believes in social justice. He pushes it through his nonprofit, which is illegal because they're supposed to be nonpartisan, not for against a candidate, but it's all about social justice. They have it in our schools. They have it. It's a Salvation Army of social justice. Look it up. Google it. The NFL, it's all social justice being jammed upon us. And our media is an accomplice to take away our rights, pull us into the globalist one world order. One world governed by the United Nations and those crooks that want to make up human rights of migration and at the same time try to take your human right of freedom of speech away. Real rights. The people need to start paying attention and educating others that don't know this.